Welcome back to part two, episode 210 at What's Your One More. I'm your host, Quinton Harris. You're dialed in for the second part of the episode we just did on why home prices aren't crashing, even in these rising rate environments. And, you know, I got a little, my producer was like, hey, Q, you definitely started talking a little bit more than you normally do about what's on YouTube and what people are saying and where they're going with it. Yeah, it's a little heated. You could probably guess that episode because, again, I see how people react to negativity, and I see how people are filled with misinformation, and then decisions are made. And it's like, oh man, if we could just alter the course of facts over fear. You know, one of my dear friends gave me that kind of tagline there. I can't take credit, but he was like, the problem is we have facts over fear, and people operate with fear over facts. And man, Patrick, if you're out there, you know exactly who I'm talking to here. It's a great line, and he nailed it right because he's exactly right. And in this episode, I'm going to go chart heavy. Real chart heavy, because again, I want to go all the way back and I want to get those facts for you so that you're not fearful on all this nonsense that's been produced out there, especially if you live in social media, and many people do, whether we like it or not, and first-time homebuyers definitely live there. So in this episode, this is for you. If you're a first-time homebuyer, if you're a mortgage person, if you're a real estate person, this episode's for you. Share this episode, get this information out there, and share these charts. Go to our YouTube channel at What's Your One More, because we're going to light it up with charts all over this episode. So thanks for tuning in. So here we are at part two. I just mentioned in the intro, we're going to go a little chart heavy here. So if you're listening to this in your car, you know, when you get back and you're in Spotify, if you're in Apple, again, thanks for tuning in. 5-star review us on there. But go to YouTube at our channel, What's Your One More, because all the charts and all the graphs are going to live there. These are yours to use and look at. And shout out to the Housing Wire for a lot of these graphs that they made out there, because, man, they're killing it with this data sets, and really makes our job easy as we get on the show here. But let's talk about this. So one of the things that you have to have for a market to crash is distressed sellers. I just ended the last episode talking about that. But what makes a distressed seller? Well, a distressed seller is someone that needs to sell the home, but usually is in a bad position. We use that word distress, and it can mean many different things. Maybe it's like a death in the family. It's a divorce. But oftentimes, it's a foreclosure or a short sale. So we track that data, and that is the information we want to look at here, because you got to have that. So if I go back to 2018 and back to 2007, and I track financial, distress, we can track that in the form of bankruptcies, and then foreclosures, we can track that as well. One of the things we look at is, hey, where are they now versus where are they then? Because again, history is going to tell us and give us all the signs of what's going on here. Well, here's some good news. Pretty historically low right now. But if I go take a look at a couple of things here on this chart, and again, YouTube heavy here on this one, the bright red is going to be the amount of foreclosures per year, and that pink is going to be the amount of bankruptcies per year. And the bankruptcies will always give you a foreshadowing of what's going to happen on the foreclosure market. You could say it's almost like a leading indicator, if you may. And if you go back to 2003, bankruptcies were on the rise, and it is not even close. And by 2005, Q4, they peaked at an all-time high from 2003 moving forward here to 2024. And it's really, really high, very much up towards like the 900,000 plus range. However, what followed that 2-3 years later is a rise of foreclosures. And that kind of makes sense, right? You got bankruptcies happening over here in this big old wave. Well, probably it's a trailing wave of 24 months, 18 months, you're going to have foreclosures. That's what was happening. So that's one of the things we track and look at. And so during this time, you had this major rise. And you'll see this kind of black bar here from 2005 forward to 2009 showing you this peak, if you may, of foreclosures following those bankruptcy waves. But here's what's interesting. If you look at where we are right now, we are still, by Q2 of 2024, we're at 47,000 foreclosures. And if you look at this line here, that sounds like a lot, but it's historically low. It's so low that it's not even, you couldn't even compare 08, 09 to anywhere from 2024. It's way low. Now you're going to have this really bar that shows nothing really happened in 2020 and 2021. That goes back to that forbearance stuff the government allowed. But I mean, and then in 2021, 22, it picks up, ever so slightly. And you had this wave of people going, oh, foreclosures are up. They're up 100 and something percent. And that's that whole podcast we did on, if I go from two foreclosures to 4, then that's going to be up 100%, right? So again, the percentages were deceiving compared on the numbers. This chart really puts it in perspective, and this comes from the New York Fed. And you can see on here that it's not even close. Like, you talk about a picture worth 1,000 words. Dude, this is worth 1,000,000 words right here. Like this is this really just takes it and like mic drops the whole foreclosure argument because there's nothing brewing. There's not a wave. Bankruptcies are at an all-time low over the last 20 years as well. Like you're not seeing anything that indicates there's this ideology that foreclosure waves. So again, you have to have distressed sellers. So distressed sellers are usually financially or they're foreclosures. And both of those are all-time lows right now over the last 20 years. So that kind of like shuts the door on that whole argument. And again, facts over fear. So distressed sellers are going to be the key component. I continue to say that I'm going to sound like a broken record to a 2008 crash. We don't have those right now. So another thing is we want to take a look at is you have to have this just overwhelming wave of inventory, right? You have to have so much inventory on the market that the distressed sellers are so abundant that they're almost outweighing the sellers that are not distressed. And that's that wave of inventory. Remember, you go back to the last episode I talked about in 2012, this shadow inventory that's looming. That a lot of people thought that shadow inventory would be like a tsunami of inventory that would just drop on the market and continue that trend of a real estate crash, and it didn't happen. But you need that. You need that as part of the component. The first component is distressed sellers. A wave of inventory is the second. Well, I mean, yes, our inventory has gone up slightly. It's healthy. It's getting healthier because it's been unhealthy in the form of not enough. We're nowhere near oversupplied right now. Nowhere near it. So when you hear the YouTubers, when you hear the people on Instagram, you hear people talking about crashes. Guys, it's simple. Not enough inventory and not enough distressed sellers. I'm providing you the facts. I'm giving you the detailed reports. They're just going online and they're putting icons on there and, emojis and all kinds of stuff. It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. And it's wrong. It's absolutely wrong. And so when you take a look at this here, one of the things, and I love the argument hey, you have to adjust the home price for inflation during this time. And they tie it to some index that's like, oh, well, you have to adjust it based on the amount of homeowners or the amount of wage growth or the amount of, I heard say gold prices. I'm like, what? No, that is wrong as well. Like, it doesn't even make sense. That doesn't even make sense at all, period. That has nothing to do with it. Yes, has home prices gone up as inflation has gone up? Absolutely. It's one of the leading components of that. But it's not adjusted attached to any index out there of gold or, wage salary or anything of that nature. Housing prices have gone up independently of all of that. It just so happens those things have gone up with housing right now. So I want to take a look at something here. Here's another chart I've got on here, and this shows the national new single-family listings. And we look at this on a national level, but we want to know how many homes are coming on the market month by month, right? And we want to track that from 2023, 2022, and 2024. Here's some interesting stats on this. Basically, 2023 and 2024 are going to be the lowest new listing periods that we've seen in quite some time. You could argue ever, but it's the lowest that we've seen in quite some time, meaning inventory is down. Remember, I just talked about you got to have inventory up. You have to have distressed sellers along with that. Again, it's down. And so the data has been trending from about 30,000 to 90,000 new homes being listed weekly for the last 5 years, right? Coming to market, like single-family homes. If you compare that to 2009, 2011, like if you compare what's coming on the market right now to 2009, 2011, 2011 ranged anywhere from 250,000 homes a week to a peak of 400, I think it was like 396,000 homes on a week. That's a wave of new inventory. What else was happening during that time? Panic, pure panic was going on during that time, led by distressed sellers. I know I keep saying it, but you're going to get the point here. That's not the case in today's market. It hasn't been the case since that one time. And by the way, that is one time in the history of real estate. Go back to that last episode, that chart, 1942 to 2024. You do the math. That's a lot of years. Right? That's a lot. It's 82 years, I believe. Quick math. Hope I'm right there. But 82 years, you had a 5-year window of the greatest, only one period in the United States, Great Depression of real estate. That's it. So 5 minus 82 gives you 75 years there of positive real estate growth, minus the 1 year that was -1. You had 74 years of real estate growth. It's hard to argue with that. It's not even worth an argument. It's just, there's another mic drop commentary right there. That's hard to compete with. So the other difference here is that the only time in 80 years that the national home prices crashed was when this new listing data was running 3 times higher than what the current data is right now. I just said we had 30 to 90 coming on, But if you look at that trend where it was 250 to 400, that's 3 times what the current market is right now. That's a wave. We don't have that right now. So again, distressed sellers and a wave of inventory, not there. The other thing this time around is what causes distressed sellers? Well, loss of jobs, I would say. Economy, yeah, that causes a loss of jobs. It's part of it. But it was the fact there was no equity. There was no equity in these homes. Because see, here's what's interesting. Had those homes in 2008 not been underwater, and we can do a whole nother episode on why they were underwater, but had they not been overvaluated, had they not been purchased with zero to no money down over equity to begin with, there probably would have been some equity there. But there wasn't. So how can you sell something when you owe more than what you can sell it for, right? That's another problem. Like, have you ever tried to sell something for more than, or sell something for less than what you owe on it? Like, have you ever tried to sell something like, oh, hey, like, here's this car. I'm going to use a number here. I owe $25,000 on it, but I'm going to try to trade it in or sell it for 20. You usually don't do that deal, right? You usually don't do it unless you're trading in and the dealer stacks another 5 on top of the new purchase. Then you're buried in it even further, right? And some people do that, right? Because dealers make it so easy to just keep compounding that number back in there. But the point is, no one wants to sell something for less than they owe on it, right? And in real estate, the same thing held true, except the numbers were exponentially bigger than that $25,000 I used. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so depending on what region of the country you lived in, it could be 100, it could have been 300,000. Well, that's still a deficiency that's owed to someone in this particular purchase transaction. You can't roll that and stack it on top of another house like you could a vehicle. So there was a lot of situations taking place where people had just given up. I mean, there was no hope. How in the hell am I going to get rid of this home and I owe $150,000 more than I can sell it for? Oh, and by the way, every month I sit here and complain and I dwell about that. That 150 turns into 160, 200, 225. I mean, it's exponentially how bad that took place. Over a 5-year window, a lot of people said, I can't do this anymore. So they just threw in the keys, and there's your foreclosures. There's your short sales. All of that was happening. If you were in real estate and you lived through that, you either lived through it and survived, or you got the hell out of real estate and you have the financial scars all over your arms to show it still. Many of us do, right? That was a tough time. We're nowhere near that right now. I mean, to kind of take back and say, oh, this is like 2008 all over again, it's really nowhere near, but it's a very insulting comment for those that lived through 2008. Yeah, there might be some buyer psychology that's taking place that's similar to that, but there's no real estate market that's taking place close to that. I'll go to this chart that I have on here about the loan-to-value ratio of U.S. mortgages right now. There's a ton of equity this time around. I mean, yeah, I think a lot of it was accelerated by the pandemic boom that happened, but there is a ton here. If you look at this chart, the loan-to-value of homes with mortgages under 50% is insane right now in America. Loan to value less than 50%. And over 40% of the homes in America don't even have a mortgage. I think we talked about that in the last episode or two. That blew my mind. 40% of the homes in America don't even have a mortgage. Like, you look at health compared to where it was. Let's go 2010, because that's really when stuff really got bad. 2010, when the new listing data was exploding, over 23% of those new listings, 23% were completely underwater. Like, that's crazy. 23% of all listings that came to market were underwater. That's not telling you how many were actually like they're trying to sell it for exactly what they owe so they don't have to bring any money, but they ain't making any money. That was considered a win back then, by the way. Like, I didn't have to bring any money to the closing table. I won. But you weren't netting anything in the transaction. That's how bad that had got. Where we are today, 40% of the homes, 40% of homes in America don't even have a mortgage. Like, equity positions are in a much better position. So again, you got to have a distressed seller. We don't have that. Equity alone puts us in a better position than we were. But again, go online. What are the naysayers saying? The crash is coming. All that equity is false. It's a bubble. It's going to bust. Well, I mean, why isn't it happening? Why isn't it 14 years later I'm hearing the same message and it's not happening? We don't have a distressed sell market, and we don't have a wave of inventory. I'm going to continue to say that throughout this episode because I want to hammer that home, because that needs to be the message from the real estate community outward to those home buyers that are looking to buy a home that are unfortunately influenced by the nonsense that's out there on social media. So much to the tune, I'm doing 2 parts on it. That's how passionate I am about this. And hey, you guys, if you've listened to this show for some, you know, I've got 2 kids. I've got one that's 18. I got one that's getting ready to be 17. I want them both to be homeowners, right? And depending on what point in their lives they do that, I don't want them being influenced at all by any of this nonsense. I don't want them being a first-time home buyer at 35 years old because they sat around and they listened to this nonsense that's being, spoken online because they're thinking, oh, it's a bad time to buy a house. That it couldn't be more incorrect than what it is right now. And, you know, if you think you're buying at the peak, what do you think the people in 2022 thought they were doing? What do you think the people in 21 thought they were doing? Buying at the peak. And my good friend Alex Stewart, who's always, you know, got some great one-liners. This one's one of his. If you're listening, Alex, shout out to you. He said, aren't you always buying at the peak, though? And I was like, Alex, that's a hell of a line and so true, because you're always buying at the peak and you always feel like you're buying at the top. And then you look up and you're like, wait a minute, there's a new peak. That's how real estate works. So the other thing to take a look at is this. When I talk about underwater homes, I just showed you all the equity lines on there. If I look at underwater homes, 1.7 of the homes in America, 1.7 are underwater. Not new listings, not new homes coming to the market. 1.7 of all homes in America, all homes, 1.7% have an underwater disposition on the loan to value right now. Pretty good numbers, telling me that 98.3% of homeowners have an equity position in their home in America right now. 40% of those, as we know, are free and clear. 50% of that 98 are 50% or less loan to value. Like, let that sit in for a minute. That is some of the most healthiest equity positions we've seen in the history of America. Furthermore, like, it also is accelerating the net worth of American households throughout the United States. I believe Kiplinger, or it was Kiplinger, said that the vast majority of the American net worth is through the wealth development of real estate equity. Thought that was an interesting comment. So keep in mind, at this point, here's what's kind of like simple for me. There has to be two things to make this component be a crash. And anytime you hear this, it's funny, these guys that do this stuff, they don't bring this up. You have to have a distress sell. For a home price crash to take place, you got to have distress sellers, right? We broke down at the very beginning of this episode of what that is. You got to have a wave of inventory. These variables have to be there to recreate something that's perpetuated online. It has to be there. It's not even close. So you also have to have a declining market. We don't have that either. Again, seasonally, they're going to make an argument. But again, if you look at year over year over year over year, on the whole trajectory of what the appreciation was that year, we're actually growing, not downward, as they want to say right now. Because again, that's a seasonal thing. It always happens this time of year. So the other thing is this. For YouTubers believe rising mortgage rates over the last 2 years would automatically crash home prices. I think history disagrees. I think the data disagrees. And for me, for a home price to happen, you're right, it has to be a distressed seller. So without that in this market and without that inventory, we are not going to have a crash. We're going to continue to have an upward trajectory of appreciation, just like we've seen 74 out of the last 82 years. Guys, if you like what you're hearing, please share this episode. Please go to our YouTube channel at What's Your One More. Grab these charts. Shout out to the Housing Wire Group and Logan Montashami putting these together. Go grab these. Take a look at them. Please share them. I mean, this is important stuff and a message that we need to get out there. If you know someone that's looking to buy a home, you have a friend or family that owns a home, send this stuff to them. Let them hear this out. Let them get the facts over fears and not be influenced by the media, specifically the social media. Guys, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you the next episode at What's Your One More.
Got one more shot, I'm gonna make it. One more chance, I'm gonna take it. I meant it when I said it, now it's time for me to do it. I got one life to live, so I put my all into it.